So I have a project, we're pitching VCs Thursday and Friday, and I try to explain tokenomics. So I got introduced to this 12 months ago. My background's in real estate, that's what our project is. So when we speak to VCs, we try to explain the tokenomics, how the token gains value. And I feel like I end up giving a dissertation to defense and explain network theory, quantity theory of money, so on and so forth. How would you say, like, what's the best way? Because I feel like there's a big cognitive dissonance between how academia explains it and how a VC wants me to explain it. Because you know how those people are, their mindset is they have a very short attention span. And if I went into a whole presentation about how the token gains value, I lose them. And I feel like I'm trying to put an elephant in a barrel in terms of explaining it in a concise, succinct way. So I guess my question to all of you, especially Dr. Hurder, is what would you say is the best way to convey that to someone like that?
Awesome. So the way, I agree with you, don't talk about formulas. But it's really all about, what are the rights that this token gives you? I mean, they could be goods and services. It sounds like you're tokenizing real estate.
Yes.
So it's basically, you're going to create this token that can be exchanged on a decentralized protocol, and it's going to give people the rights to a part of a building. I mean, what rights do I get if I'm a token holder?
So we're also doing a global listing service, so all the data from all the content, like the people that the source of the content, like the multiple listing service, doing a global listing service. So all the realtors, all the brokers, all the firms are providing data. So they're all token holders.
Got it. So I typically focus on sort of what is the thing of value that the token gets you? Why is it good that it's just stored on a decentralized ledger or blockchain? And then go from there. I mean, no one wants to hear about token supply.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can add something on this because I face that problem too. Because I am economic finance professor, and I face the same trouble when I teach MBA students because you could go through the math and you lost every one of them. So I think what works usually is just kind of create analogies, right? So, but it needs a lot of hard thinking because typically you need to think about complicated concept for a long time before you can come up with some analogy that kind of clicks with the audience. Any other questions?
Hi, for Stephanie, do you get just are you just involved in the initial planning of these ventures, or are you an ongoing consultant that gets to see the projects kind of materialize over periods of time? And if so, how successful have most of these, some of your clients been, and kind of where do they typically go wrong?
So I'd say most of the projects we work with are still pretty early stage. We have had some where we come in and sort of do crisis management. And I think we've seen some good success. We're under NDA with all our clients, so I can't speak specifically, but we've definitely helped at least one platform that was on a third launch to refine some of their design.
Yeah, but have you seen actual systems, these marketplaces in action where there's active participants that are, where these systems are kind of vibrant systems and what they're running?
I mean, I think we know from the data that most of the platforms that have launched are not super popularly used. I mean, just to give an example of a platform we're not involved with, but I've seen sort of evolve its economic design is actually OpenBazaar. So they sort of launched and then they went through this process where they learned lessons about sort of, oh wait, we actually need this service and we need that service, and they mostly had to do with economic services. So that's just an example I like of, I think they're still up and running, but they're sort of learning as they go.
Thanks.
Thanks for the great presentations. Do you guys run any ecosystem funds, or do you help organizations run ecosystem funds? And what are some best practices for this and in relation to economic design here?
The core team of Livepeer does not run a fund, but there is a community node that promises to devote 95% of all of its rewards into developing the community of Livepeer. Which is a really interesting way to think about this inflation-based incentive, right? And the best practice, like I actually really like this way of growing an ecosystem because it's very grassroots, it's very decentralized, it is kind of native to what the blockchain ecosystem is about, and that's just kind of from an aesthetic standpoint, right? But when it comes to like how the fund gets distributed, a lot of it comes down to just like principles of like how do you allocate capital, right? So you gotta have smart people who are making decisions based on accountability, right? Like if you give grants to somebody, they should be able to very well articulate what's the like how they're going to use the fund and what's the measurable results that they're going to deliver, right? So it's no different than any kind of traditional allocation of capital. But in this decentralized world, one thing that's interesting is if you're allocating the asset that's the native token of your project, you're actually allocating ownership of your network, right? And if there is an inflationary mechanism in your network, you're essentially giving somebody this like golden egg that continually mints token, right? So and that creates a very strong economic alignment between the grantee and the project, and I think it's really interesting.
But on the other hand, I mean that those people the reason they need the funding is because they probably need fiat. Right? So how do you I'm asking a question here. But so how do you? By the way, we don't have an ecosystem fund yet, so this is also something we're interested to learn as well.
I think actually it depends on the situation. A lot of times they don't need fiat, right? The fact that like they're actors in this decentralized ecosystem and they want to be paid for their work. That's it, right? And maybe they have different revenue streams to like pay their rent or whatever, right? A lot of times these are companies that are started to create services, but because they now have a small ownership of the network, they're economically aligned with the project to create value for this project.
Hi, thanks for the great presentations. So we operate a consulting firm that essentially marries some of the principles of design thinking with thinking in terms of blockchains and figuring out kind of like what you identified as like the value proposition there. So exploring use cases and bringing people to the point where they actually get to think creatively about like how a cryptoeconomic design would actually address that issue that they come up with. So in product design and software development, there are a lot of explored agile methodologies for, the expectation is that you never are expected to get it right at first try. You go through cycles. So there's some built-in agility differently from any waterfall type of methodology. In your presentations, I think you all mentioned experiments or like a more scientific procedure for like a model and creating evidence in the field and whatnot. Well, what I'm wondering is like, what is how do you prototype economic design? Like, what is how do you build an agility so that because I suspect that you're not expected to get it right at first try. There are like a lot of nuances that will go either unnoticed or you'll make assumptions and some of them will be not as you expected from the beginning. So I was just wondering if you have methods for like practically prototyping and learning and iterating on how you design these economies.
Yeah. So we don't claim that we have the best process because we haven't done this for many times. But just share our process. So we initially, I think one thing that Stephanie shared, I think I definitely agree with, and I think for you guys as well, just to really need to think about the value proposition because without the value proposition, it's really difficult to even think about how to design something, or if you have something, you don't have, you don't know how well you have designed, right? There's no way to measure the success of it. So I think that's very, very critical. And for us, I mean, we came, we didn't really crystallize the value proposition at the very, very beginning. So we have a vague idea. I think that was enough for us to move forward. And then, we look at all the, we spent a lot of time studying other similar systems. So for us, that's their web protocols. We spent, we read papers, we talk to other people, blog posts and conference talks and all those things, just to try to build a mental model of, what everybody else is doing, and then what are the critiques people have for these designs and what they're doing well. So sort of, even we're not using those, but just like tools or methods for help to us to formulate our own design. And I think from there, if you know our value proposition, then before anything else, we just zoom in. I think in design, there's a concept called epicenter design. So instead of trying to think about, everything, this corner, how to do that, so that's usually like web-based design, right? Instead of thinking about what font we're going to use and what, size or colors, and there's just so many details. So we just say, okay, let's zoom out all these, blur all these things, and look at the most important thing for us, and how do we get the shape of that right? And then we went through, so because we don't have to think many other things, so we went through many iterations just on that. And to got to a point where we're happy, and then slowly all the other things sort of emerge as well. And most of them, we didn't really have to think, tweak a lot. They just, common practice to solve this, and common practice other people use, and probably, good enough for us as well, because that's not how we differentiate anyway. So that's sort of our process.
Yeah, happy to add to that. I mean, you've hit on something which I think is very interesting. So I would say 3 things. So I think first, this is one of the reasons why governance is so important, and that even if you plan to have a decentralized platform, it's really great to maintain centralized control for sort of an initial period so that you can make adjustments and you're not just saying, good luck everybody, hope it doesn't crash. I think there's definitely room for this. I'm very excited for in economics there are lots. I'm very excited for someone to come up with some mix of a game, like an actual game in a decentralized economy that tests things. I'm waiting for that. That would be awesome. And I think the third thing is, I mentioned before in the non-blockchain space, the Spectrum auction. They were going to auction off $1 zillion of Spectrum, and the professors working on it were at Caltech. And one of the things they actually did was they offered $100 to any undergrad who could find a bug. And so they literally just said, okay, you really smart people, go through what we've done and find everything you can think of to bring it down. And so I think that kind of vetting can be very useful, especially this was 20 years ago, so I think $100 for a college student was pretty good money. So.
Hi, my name is John Walls, and I'm with a investment banking company raising capital in the space. And I'm fascinated by this notion of inflation and how it impacts the projects that you're working on. And so my question is, how common is it that different companies utilize this inflation, or is this kind of revolutionary for the two of you? You're both kind of using it, and so I'm curious, is everyone using it, or is this something that you guys are using it that's not necessarily something everyone's following? And then just a follow-up question for Stephanie, I believe, is it made me think about the overall general macroeconomics of a place like the United States, and I wonder whether or not that same inflationary incentive is used to try to get normal actors to put their money to work so that it doesn't just atrophy under their mattress or in some 0.5% savings account. So anyway, love to hear more about inflation. Thank you.
I think, at least, for the layer 1 protocol, that's very, very common. A big reason for this is, either you have a ongoing, inflation that doesn't stop, or there's a hard cap. You need a process to increasingly release the tokens to the community, right? And that's just, natural process anyway. And then the question is, okay, so how do I use this sort of inflation budget, right? And how do I distribute it? How do I use it? Who do I reward it to? Who are the people that are doing the work? Going back to the value proposition, what's the core, resource supplier you want to compensate for? So in a way, I mean, when we designed, our economics model, we think a lot about like this is a decentralized community or even like decentralized country in a way or decentralized city. So how do you, if there's nobody in charge, right? So how do you fund the infrastructure for like the military or cleaning streets and sort of thing? What is an effective way you can raise revenue for this, say, country, right? For us on Airline Protocol, I think we believe the most important is security. So it's like the analogy is how do you raise revenue to have a military that can protect the country, right? The wealth of the country. So if you think about it that way, then inflation is by far the easiest, right? You could just say, force everybody in the network to contribute, 1 coin every month, and otherwise I'll do something to you. You have to do it, and then so that could be possible. I'm not saying it's not, but inflation or new issuance of tokens is infinitely more accessible as a tool to do that.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly like the most like aesthetically pleasing way to tax something, right? Like nobody gets like. People don't usually get super mad because inflation happens because it's invisible to most people, right? Versus if you tax people, people complain. I've actually seen models where there's this like burn and mint model where it happens in an opposite way where you decrease the monetary supply somehow by increasing everybody else's value. But there's my personal theory is that there's some kind of mental block in the participants that's like. I don't see my value increasing just because you burn some token, right? So that's a problem there.
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting piece of, I think, psychology of just like, you should think that, giving people more tokens or burning, like, burning somebody's stake, or it's both are sort of reallocations of value, but they have very different implications. Like people, if people do a bunch of work and you're like, well, you didn't get anything, but other people lost stuff, that's not quite the same psychological effect as getting paid. And I'm not a central banker, but I think that the concept of a negative interest rate is related to this, where it's basically that if you keep your money in a savings account, you have to pay the bank. So this comes up in a relative space, although at least in the US, the inflation rate has been pretty low for a while.
There's another question. Yeah, okay, so ask question.
Hi, Eric. I was the hacker that you helped half a year ago, and we won the ETH in Francisco. So my question is, I don't know if any of you guys actually are familiar with the concept
I don't claim to be an expert in this, but I think generalized mining is a concept that's like very much from a investor's perspective, right? So if you are holding some tokens and you want to get return on that token, what can you do, right? So back like with Bitcoin, you can invest in a bunch, like you can buy a bunch of GPUs and you mine, right? And that's the way you get return on your money. In these new networks, if you hold tokens, before generalized mining, you just hold the tokens, and you had no way to get more tokens from the token that you have. But with these like incentive structure, you kind of can put your tokens to work and kind of earn more by doing the work, right? And I kind of think about this from a builder's perspective. So from somebody who's building a protocol, building an ecosystem, and looking at how necessary is this type of value allocation in creating a successful network that's long lasting, right? And I think from that perspective, it's very necessary because an ecosystem needs a way for values to be distributed to the creators of the actual for I guess value to be denominated to the creator of the value in a fairly egalitarian way, so that people will continue to play this economic game, right? Because otherwise, people just give up and go to somewhere else. So that's kind of my very high level view of that.
Yeah, so we are a proof of work system, so first of all, so this may or may not directly apply to us. But if you try to try to squeeze those two together, you can think about generalized mining. You have a virtual mining machine, right? So your virtual mining machines are capital, and you consume a lot less electricity, but eventually, the mining machine will turn out, mining rewards for you. So one thing I've been thinking about this is, in proof of work systems, there is, especially for GPU mining protocols, there's this attack that basically, I think a nice hash attack, whatever they call that, right? So people can rent hash rate from like a generalized, you can think about like a generalized hashing, right, pool. And then basically these are the people who say, hey, I don't care which one I mine, and I give the decision to you, you decide which coin I mine at the moment, the price and everything, right? So I don't think this has happened in proof of stake yet, but if you really think about this, all the virtual machines are the same. They're all just capital, right? So it's very transferable in a way that I can see something like nice hash happen for basically proof of stake mining, and say, hey, if you don't want to follow all these projects and you don't know which one is going to give you more return, why don't you give to me? I will manage that for you, and I'll make sure that you have the highest return at any point in time. I think it's the same value proposition as nice hash. And then if that happens, we kind of, in POW world, we kind of don't like that, don't want that to happen, at least when we design our POW, right? So we are aware of that, and we want to make sure we don't have that kind of attack. But I would like to see, like for generalized mining or proof of stake world, how people think about this attack vector, because capital can all of a sudden come in and all of a sudden go out, just because it can be rented very, very cheaply in abstract memory in a way. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that you may have more questions to ask, so we're gonna just open up, and there's pizzas, there are drinks, and so our guest is also gonna hang around for a while, so we can just take all the questions offline. So okay, yeah. So again, this is an event organized by Binary District and Nervos.